I remember years ago, on Mother's Day, I gave a sermon about my mom and, talked about Mother's Day in kind of glowing terms. And after the service, somebody came up to me and said, Don, it was really nice to hear about your mom and everything, but that's not the way it was for me. And I felt kind of guilty. Because Mother's Day is a day of many mixed emotions. I mean, some of you, especially a lot of the kids that were here earlier, are moms for the first time. Some of you have a healthy relationship with your mom and you get together with your family around the dining room table. I know a lot of you miss your mom because your mom is no longer here. And some of you, unfortunately, maybe had a mom that just wasn't there and didn't give you the kind of love and care that you would have deserved. And so Mother's Day, there's a lot of journeys just in this small room here. There's someone in the prayer book, a teacher, said we want to pray for kids who don't have a mom. And in this room, I think of Kathy's family, where she was in a situation where a young lady who was being raised by her grandmother got reunited with her birth mom and has a chance for us. So I mean, there's all kinds of journeys with moms and grandmas and families, but today we celebrate the gift of unconditional love, because even if you don't have kids of your own, I'm sure you're a mom to somebody. And even if you don't have a mom, there's somebody who gives you that mom kind of love that we so desperately need in our world. Last week I had a graveside service, and it was perfect for a graveside service. It was 37 degrees and raining as we stood around the gravesite, and it was just about 10 people. And I didn't really know the family. They just needed somebody to meet them there, and I met them there. And then I said, does anybody want to just say something about her? And this lady said, if you don't mind. And she said, I grew up without a mom. And Eleanor here became my mom. Her door was open. The refrigerator was full. When I needed someone to talk to, she was always there. And so this week, and especially Sunday on Mother's Day, I'm going to think of her because she was my mom and gave me that kind of unconditional love that I so desperately needed. And then I think of ladies like Esther. Esther was a lady who grew up in my dad's home church. She was at Gustavus. She was the Sunday school superintendent there for 40 years. She lived with her mom, and then when her mom died, she lived alone. She was single, had no family. But my God, the people in the church just loved her. I mean, she loved those kids, and she loved those families. And my dad was really the only one that took care of her. And so when she got sick and was nearing the end of her life, Esther, this beloved lady in the church, looked at my dad, and she was very, very stubborn. She said, Glenn, when I die, I want nothing. I mean, no funeral, just when I die, I die. And my dad went. And so when she died, my dad made funeral arrangements. And I said, well, Dad, didn't Esther say she didn't want anything? And my dad said, Don, I know you're going to be a minister in the not too distant future. And if I do nothing, there's like 200 families and 300 people in that church that want to say goodbye. And they're going to be calling me about why I didn't do anything. And just remember this, Don, you don't have to quote me, but when you die, you lose your vote. And I've never forgotten that. And my dad had a red book with all his affairs and wishes in it. And he said, Don, this is what I'd like my funeral to be like. But guess what? When I die, just do what you want. It's just fine. When you die, you lose your vote. And I was thinking about that. But what do moms do? Whether it's your real mom or somebody that loves you. I think of my mom and her legacy, and I guess the one thing I remember about my mom was that she always put other people first. She was the kind of person that would step back and listen to your heartbeat and listen to your spirit, and she would always put others first before herself. So last night we went to see the musical Footloose performed by the middle school where my granddaughter goes. And it was the Footloose musical. It was a lot of fun, and I remember watching the movie Footloose years and years ago. And it kind of got to me last night because it's the story really of a small town and a minister and his church and the kids in that town. And of course, in the background there was an accident. They thought alcohol was involved, and one of the kids that was killed in the accident was the minister's son. And so this very conservative minister in his church said in this small town, as long as I'm the pastor of this church, there will be no drinking and no dancing. And that's just the way it was. But he also had a daughter. And of course, the daughter falls in love with this relatively, kind of over-the-edge guy that was kind of hip and loved to sing and he loved to dance. And at the end of the movie, the minister has an awakening. Because somehow, because of the sensitivity of his wife and, of course, his daughter and this young man that he finally got to like, he had an awakening. And he realized that the church and him, that's not what religion was. That he always put himself and the church first. That was the most important thing. And he realized that his daughter and her boyfriend and his family, they needed to dance to the winds of God's Spirit. Because not only did he lose his son, but his wife lost a son, his daughter lost a brother, and the kids in the high school lost a friend. And there, looking up in the sky, the minister discovered that is what life is all about. It's not about me. It's not about just the church. It's about the beauty and the power of the human spirit. That kind of got to me. And I started thinking of my own journey. Because over the years, I've had a couple of awakenings. I remember years ago when Marilyn Bunt passed away and her husband Don still is around. And I went to visit her a couple days before Mother's Day. And she said, Don, I ask you to do one thing. And I said, Marilyn, what is that? Would you please make sure that you have communion every Mother's Day? And that was back when we had communion like once a month. And I said, Marilyn, in light of your spirit and Don's spirit, I'm going to go one better. From now on, we're going to have communion every single Sunday. And of course, half the church thought I hadn't gone Catholic. But from that point on, every time we gathered for worship, we shared the Lord's Supper, because the Lord's Supper is at the very heart and soul of who we are. When we come up here, the human spirit and God's spirit, they come together. And I was thinking, oftentimes I think that things can't happen unless I'm here. And it made me realize, I remember years ago, when I was going to be gone on a Sunday, I asked Vern Bach, who was always at the early service, if he would preach for me. And at that time, Vern and Mary Ann, they didn't have any kids. He was going through a journey with cancer. He was a banker. And Vern goes, Don, I'm just an ordinary guy. I can't preach. I said, Vern, you have a story. You and Mary Ann and your feelings about the church and your journey with cancer. And this is before we live streamed the service. And I remember sitting at the kitchen table in my son's house in Arizona. And I'm sitting there having breakfast, and I get a text. It's from Mary Ann, who was at the service, watching her husband. She says, Vern's about to start. Yeah, I said, fine. I get another text in a couple minutes. Vern just began the sermon. And I get another text. He's in the middle of his sermon. She's not paying attention to Vern. She's texting me. Then she has another text. He's almost done. And then her final text was, Vern is done. Standing ovation. And I said, I want one of those. And I just got chills thinking about it and remembering that moment at the kitchen table. And so I would be gone for part of next week. And I'll be here next Sunday, but I won't be here on Thursday. And about a week ago, I asked Karen of Danny fame. And Karen comes every Thursday night. And I said, Karen, would you be willing to preach for me? And she kind of goes, Don, I said, Karen, you're here every Sunday. Your relationship with Danny is an inspiration by itself. You're a cancer survivor. And so this Thursday, instead of pretending I'm going to be here and I don't say anything, I'm encouraging people to come because Karen has a story to tell. And then after church, on Thursday night, half the congregation stays for coffee and wine in Charter Hall. And we're talking about it, and the people are saying, Karen, we can't wait to come Thursday night to hear you tell your story. And then they said, but we can't have communion because Don is not going to be there. And as soon as they said that, I said, repeat that for me. We can't have communion because Don is not going to be there. And I thought to myself, exactly how important am I? Communion is not about the minister. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic when nobody was here, and I blessed the bread and the wine, and I encouraged people at their kitchen table to get out a cracker, maybe a cup of juice or wine. And as I said the words, share the wine over your computer, because that's what communion is all about. And so we talked about it, and I said, guess what? When you're here Thursday night, you're going to have communion. Because I don't know if Jesus was Lutheran or not, and Jesus certainly wasn't ordained. He was a carpenter, an ordinary guy who became our Savior, who shared the Passover with his followers. Because communion is not about who serves it. Communion is about your insides. It's about what happens in your heart and your soul when you walk out the door after sharing the gifts. So this morning, I went in the front parking lot and looked like a lonely minister, and I watched the sunrise. And I took a picture of the sunrise. And when the sun rises, I often talk to my mom, who's been gone a long time. And I said, Mom, guess what? On Thursday night this week, when I'm gone, they're going to have communion. And I'm not going to be there. And my mom said to me, you'll be there. And then she finally said, you know, Don, after 47 years, it's about time. Amen. If you're able to, please rise for the creed.